The conquest of the heavens was the ultimate trial of two opposing civilizations, a race where the prize was not just the moon, but the right to define the future of humanity itself. In the United States, the space program was a triumph of transparency and public inspiration, where every launch was broadcast live to millions, inviting the entire world to share in the risk and the glory of discovery. The American 1960s and 80s turned the astronaut into a new type of folk hero, a scientist explorer who represented the limitless potential of a free society. In the USSR, space was treated like a nuclear secret, a shadowy operation run by the military-industrial complex where failures were erased from history and successes were used as blunt instruments of propaganda. This fundamental clash between the open frontier of the West and the closed orbit of the East is the reason why NASA's legacy lives on in every smartphone and satellite today. While the Soviet space program ended as a collection of rusted hulls and forgotten names, proving that you cannot truly reach for the stars if you are terrified of the truth on the ground. The contrast in the visibility of success versus the silence of failure revealed the moral gap between a democracy and a dictatorship in the U.S. when tragedy struck, as it did with Apollo 1 and later the Challenger. The nation mourned in the light, conducting public investigations and learning from its mistakes to ensure the safety of future crews. The American system understood that progress requires honesty even when it's painful. In the USSR, failure was a state crime. When cosmonauts died or missions exploded on the pad, the state simply pretended they never existed, airbrushing heroes out of photos and keeping grieving families under KGB surveillance. This cult of the perfect mission created a dangerous environment where safety was sacrificed for political deadlines, leading to the secret deaths of the Soviet space program that the world is only now beginning to uncover. A difference that made the US program a human endeavor and the Soviet program a cold, mechanical lie. The role of the spin-off revolution and the benefit to the common man showed how space exploration could fuel a nation's prosperity. In the US, the Apollo program wasn't just about the moon. It was a technological seed bank that gave birth to modern computing, lightweight materials, water purification, and life-saving medical imaging. The American system ensured that the billions spent on space were recycled back into the pockets and homes of the taxpayers, creating entire new industries. In the USSR, space was an intellectual dead end for the public. The incredible engineering that went into the Soyuz or the Buran stayed locked inside military, closed cities, never reaching the civilian economy. While a Soviet cosmonaut was eating space food in orbit, his family back on Earth was still struggling to find basic vegetables in a state shop. This extractive science proved that the Soviet Union was more interested in the image of power than in the actual well-being of its people. The contrast in the astronaut as a citizen versus the cosmonaut as a tool defined the human side of the race. In the US, the astronauts were individualistic, often outspoken men who wrote books, gave interviews, and became leaders in their communities after their missions, reflecting the autonomy of the American spirit. They were pilots who became icons because of their skill and character. In the USSR, the cosmonaut was a biological extension of the machine, a figurehead whose personality was suppressed by the state and replaced by a cardboard hero of the Soviet Union persona. They were forbidden from speaking their minds and were often treated as state property even after their return. This dehumanization of the explorer showed that the Soviet system feared the fame of its own heroes, wanting the glory of the mission but fearing the independence of the man who flew it. The final contrast in this first part is the destination versus the projection, the difference between a real journey and a propaganda stunt. In the US, the moon landing was the culmination of a decade of steady, public, and verifiable progress, a giant leap that was confirmed by independent scientists and telescopes around the world. The American system delivered on its promise to the world. In the USSR, the space program in the late 70s and 80s became an exercise in Potemkin science, launching repetitive missions and fake space stations like the Almaz, which was actually a secret military spy station, to maintain the illusion of parity while their technology was falling decades behind. This obsession with looking strong, rather than being strong, meant that when the US introduced the Space Shuttle, the Soviet Union was forced to build the Buran, a desperate carbon copy that they could never afford to fly more than once, a difference that proved the US was building a stairway to the stars, while the USSR was just building a billboard in the sky. The second phase of the space race was a war of shadows, where the Soviet Union's inability to keep pace with American microelectronics led to a desperate campaign of industrial espionage that defined the late Cold War era. In the United States, the development of the Space Shuttle and GPS was the result of a transparent and competitive ecosystem of private contractors, university researchers, and government engineers, a system where innovation was driven by the free exchange of ideas and the massive computing power of the burgeoning Silicon Valley. The American spacecraft was a digital masterpiece, controlled by sophisticated onboard computers that allowed for reusability and precision. In the USSR, the state was forced into a path of parasitic engineering, where the KGB spent billions trying to steal Western blueprints because the Soviet command economy simply could not produce the high-quality silicon chips or reliable software needed for modern spaceflight. This fundamental difference between a creator economy and a copycat bureaucracy ensured that while the US was looking toward the future, the Soviet Union was always one step behind, desperately trying to reverse engineer a reality they didn't fully understand. The contrast in The Tragedy of Soyuz 1 and The Price of Haste revealed the lethal cost of political pressure over engineering integrity. In the US, while the Apollo program faced its own setbacks, the push to the moon was governed by a rigorous check and balance system where engineers had the power to stop a launch if they detected a flaw, a culture of safety through accountability. In the USSR, the calendar was the supreme commander. When Vladimir Komarov was sent up in the untested Soyuz 1, engineers reported over 200 technical defects, but the party leadership demanded a launch to coincide with a political anniversary. The result was a falling tomb that crashed into the Earth at terminal velocity because the parachute system, which had failed in every test, failed again. This state-mandated murder was hidden from the Soviet people for decades, a difference that showed the US treated its astronauts as heroes to be saved, while the USSR treated its cosmonauts as expendable fuel for the propaganda machine. The role of Buran, the billion-ruble shadow, showed the final exhaustion of the Soviet space dream. In the US, the Space Shuttle was a versatile workhorse designed to build the future of orbital infrastructure, a project that, despite its flaws, was a genuine leap forward in aerospace technology that inspired a generation of scientists. The American system was building a tool. In the USSR, the Buran was built out of pure insecurity. It was a nearly perfect visual copy of the American shuttle, constructed not because the Soviets had a mission for it, but because they were terrified that the US shuttle could be used as a space-based bomber. The Soviet Union spent its last remaining treasure building a complex machine it couldn't afford to launch, couldn't afford to maintain, and didn't have the computers to fly properly. This hollow duplication was the ultimate proof that the USSR had run out of its own ideas, becoming a ghost of American innovation before it even left the pad. The contrast in public science versus military paranoia turned the stars into a battlefield of information. In the US, NASA's Voyager missions were a gift to all of humanity, sending back images of Jupiter and Saturn that were shared freely with every schoolchild and scientist on the planet, fostering a global sense of wonder and international cooperation. The American space program was a beacon of soft power that proved the superiority of a free society through its generosity. In the USSR, every civilian launch was a cover for a military objective. Salyut stations were often equipped with secret cannons and high-resolution spy cameras designed to track American carrier groups, turning the peaceful exploration of space into a dark game of orbital surveillance. This militarization of discovery meant that the Soviet citizen never saw the true beauty of the cosmos, but only the distorted version that served the needs of the Ministry of Defense, a difference that made space a garden for the West and a fortress for the East. The final contrast in this part is the computer gap and the death of precision, which determined the winner of the final frontier. In the US, the transition to digital flight controls and satellite-based communication turned space into an extension of the modern economy, creating a world where every American could use space technology in their daily lives, from weather reports to long-distance calls. The American system democratized the heavens. In the USSR, the reliance on heavy, primitive analog systems and vacuum tubes meant that Soviet rockets were less accurate, more dangerous, and vastly more expensive to operate. The state could launch a man into orbit, but it couldn't reliably guide him back to a specific landing zone, often leaving cosmonauts lost in the frozen wilderness for days. This technological stagnation was the final nail in the coffin, proving that you cannot win a 21st century race with 1950s tools, a reality that left the Soviet Union grounded while the American spirit continued to soar toward the edge of the solar system. The psychological warfare of the space race reached its peak when it moved from the moon to the orbital platform, a shift that exposed the exhaustion of the Soviet model against the relentless dynamism of American capitalism. In the United States, the 1980s were defined by the high frontier philosophy, where space was seen as the next logical step for commercial enterprise, leading to the birth of private satellite industries and the conceptualization of space-based manufacturing. The American system was integrating the cosmos into the global market, ensuring that every dollar spent in orbit generated $10 of value on the ground. In the USSR, space remained a sterile monument to the party, a giant ego project that drained the national budget while giving nothing back to the starving consumer. This disconnect between the cosmic glory on the television and the basement reality of the Soviet citizen created a deep social resentment, as people realized that the state was building titanium space stations while they couldn't even buy a reliable light bulb, a difference that turned NASA into a symbol of a thriving future and the Soviet program into a gilded tombstone for a dying ideology. The contrast in the Space Shuttle versus the Buran Energia system revealed the difference between a tool of utility and a weapon of vanity. In the US, the Space Shuttle was designed to be a space truck, a reusable vehicle that could lower the cost of reaching orbit and perform a wide variety of scientific and military tasks. Its design was driven by operational necessity and economic efficiency. In the USSR, the Buran was a reactive ghost, built solely because the Kremlin feared the shuttle was a space-to-ground bomber that could drop nukes on Moscow in minutes. The Soviet Union spent 16 billion rubles, money that could have modernized their entire agricultural sector, to build a machine they didn't know how to use. When the Buran finally made its one and only automated flight in 1988, it was a technical marvel, but it was also a financial suicide note, a difference that showed the US was playing a game of progress while the USSR was playing a game of survival against an enemy that existed only in their own paranoid imagination. The role of the Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars, and the Great Bluff showed how American imagination could bankrupt a totalitarian state without firing a single shot. In the US, Reagan's Star Wars program was a bold, high-tech vision of a space-based laser shield that would make nuclear weapons obsolete. And while the technology was decades away, the massive R&D investment terrified the Soviet leadership, who knew they could never compete with American supercomputers. The American system used the threat of the future as a strategic weapon. In the USSR, the response to SDI was panic and overspending, as Gorbachev and the military command were forced to divert even more resources into asymmetric responses that the country simply could not afford. This Star Wars gambit was the final blow to the Soviet economy, proving that in a race of ideas, the side that controls the silicon always beats the side that only controls the steel. The contrast in International cooperation versus puppet integration showed how the two superpowers managed their space empires. In the US, the Space Station Freedom Project, which would become the ISS, was built on a foundation of equal partnership and shared data, inviting Europe, Japan, and Canada to contribute their best technology to a common cause. Creating a global scientific community, the American system expanded through collaboration. In the USSR, the Intercosmos program was a propaganda tour for satellites, where Allied cosmonauts from countries like Cuba, Vietnam, and Mongolia were flown into orbit for a week to take photos and wave flags, while the Soviet Union kept the real technology and the control strictly to itself. This cosmic paternalism was hollow and temporary, a difference that ensured the American legacy would be global and permanent, while the Soviet influence vanished the moment the subsidies stopped. The final contrast in this part is the legacy of the launch pad, the physical and spiritual remains of the race. In the US, Cape Canaveral remains a vibrant center of human ambition, where the heritage of the past fuels the private space revolutions of the present, a place of continuous evolution and historical pride. The American space story is a living, breathing entity that continues to inspire. In the former USSR, the Baikonur Cosmodrome became a graveyard of giants, where the massive Buran hangars collapsed due to neglect, and the legendary N-1 moon rockets were cut up for scrap metal to make fences. The Soviet space dream ended in rust and bitter nostalgia, a difference that proves that a program built on the dignity of the individual can survive any crisis, while a program built on the glory of the state will inevitably crumble the moment the state itself stops believing in its own lies. The ultimate verdict of the space race was delivered not in orbit, but on the computer screens and in the consumer markets of the 1990s, where the technologies born from the Apollo and Shuttle programs reshaped the world, while the Soviet achievements gathered dust in abandoned hangars. In the United States, the space program was a catalyst for the information age, proving that the government's role was to push the boundaries of the impossible so that the private sector could turn those breakthroughs into a better life for everyone. The American system demonstrated that innovation is a relay race between the state and the people. In the USSR, space was a dead-end street where the most brilliant minds were used to build monuments to a regime that was already bankrupt. The Soviet Union proved that you can force a man into orbit with a gun to his back, but you cannot force a nation to innovate if you deny it the freedom to own its own ideas, a difference that turned the US into the world's tech superpower and the USSR into a technological museum of missed opportunities. The contrast in the aftermath of the dream and the commercialization of space revealed the power of the market over the mandate of the party. In the US, the end of the Cold War led to the rise of SpaceX, Blue Origin, and a trillion-dollar commercial space industry where the spirit of Apollo was inherited by entrepreneurs who made space travel cheaper, faster, and more accessible than ever before. The American system passed the torch to the next generation of dreamers. In the former USSR, the remnants of the space program were sold off for scrap or used as a desperate source of hard currency, launching Western satellites on old Soviet rockets just to keep the lights on in the Baikonur barracks. This fire sale of an empire was the final humiliation, proving that the Soviet Union had built a program that could only exist as a parasite on the state budget, unable to survive a single day in a world where value is determined by utility rather than by propaganda. The role of the cultural legacy and the inspiration of youth showed which side truly won the hearts of the future. In the US, the space age created a culture of optimism where generations of children grew up wanting to be astronauts, engineers, and scientists because they saw space as a frontier of hope and personal achievement. The American space story is one of heroes who returned from the moon to build a better Earth. In the USSR, the space story became a melancholy myth of a lost civilization, a source of nationalistic pride that masked a deep sense of failure. Soviet space history is filled with secret heroes whose names were only revealed after they were dead. a legacy of shadow and silence that offered the youth nothing but a reminder of what their country used to be able to do. A difference that made NASA a global brand of progress and the Soviet program a nostalgic cult of the past. The contrast in the ethics of exploration and the sanctity of human life remains the most chilling lesson of the race. In the US, every astronaut was a volunteer who knew the risks, but also knew that an entire nation would move heaven and earth to bring them home, a philosophy that valued the individual life as the highest good. This ethical commitment is what allowed the American program to survive its greatest tragedies and emerge stronger. In the USSR, the cosmonaut was a biological component, a piece of hardware that was designed to be reliable enough, but ultimately replaceable if the political objective was important enough. The stories of lost cosmonauts and the reckless haste of missions like Soyuz 1 are the dark stains on the Red Star. A difference that proves a society that treats its explorers like equipment will eventually find itself empty of heroes and full of ghosts. The final verdict on the cosmic Cold War is that the United States won because it didn't just want to beat the Russians. It wanted to expand the human experience, turning the cold vacuum of space into a laboratory for human potential. The Soviet Union failed because it viewed the stars as nothing more than a high-altitude platform for its own ego, and in its rush to conquer space, it forgot to build a society on Earth that was worth representing among the stars. Its collapse was a return to gravity, a realization that a nation cannot live on moon dust and lies while its people are starving for freedom. The American flag on the moon is a permanent reminder that liberty is the only rocket fuel that never runs out, while the Soviet program is a warning that any empire built on secrets and iron will eventually find its orbit decaying until it burns up in the atmosphere of history, leaving nothing behind but a handful of rusted parts and a cold, silent void. What do you think? Was the bigger danger to the Soviet citizen the lack of technology in the public hospital, or the existence of the secret Kremlin clinic for the elite? Share your thoughts below.